Hello, everyone, and welcome to Keepin It Rural. We are super pumped today to have an awesome guest that I have known for a lot of years. His name is Paul Hansen. He works with Land O'Lakes, which is a Minnesota-based company. So, of course, we're excited about that. Minnesota is actually home to lots of very big, giant agricultural agribusinesses and cooperatives. Pretty fun to have Paul with us today. So, Lindsay, Becca, and I, we're really going to focus on Land O'Lakes as a company, as a cooperative. There's some other things we'll talk about too, but Land O'Lakes is a giant of a company and they have all sorts of products and all sorts of things. But we're not going to cover all of that today, but we're really going to get into some of this business structure and like why cooperatives are even a thing. So, Paul, first of all, tell us a little bit about you. And then if you can roll right into how is Land O'Lakes a cooperative and why, and when did that begin?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to come share a little bit of my story and Land O'Lakes. So my story, I went to Iowa State University, grew up in Iowa. Actually, it's funny, I grew up in what I consider a rural town, small rural town down there, but it's still about 6,000 people. And so when I went to college, when I got done, I said I can go anywhere and actually probably prefer to go to a bigger city. And sure enough, in 2001, a couple of years out of college, I moved up here with my work. So the company that I was with at that time transferred me up here. And so I've been in the Twin Cities area since 2001. Hard to believe that it's already been over 20 plus years in that, but it's still been good.
Every day about my life.
Right. I've been with Land O'Lakes now for 7.5 years, and my job title there is a leader development manager. And so what that means is that I get to work with our member owners. You mentioned that we are cooperatives. We are owned by our members. And so my job is to basically try and help them find educational, experiential opportunities to try and grow their leadership skills to be a leader, because being a co-op means that you are led by your member owners. And to give a little history about Land O'Lakes, then they formed as a cooperative back in 1921. So we just recently celebrated our 100-year anniversary.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty rare to find a company, let alone a cooperative, that's been around for over 100 years. And so we were very proud of that. It did start as a dairy cooperative, which meant dairy producers came together and formed a agreement to be a cooperative, basically market their milk together. So at the time, there's all kinds of antitrust laws and things going on, but Minnesota had a cooperative law on the books, which means they could form a cooperative at that time. They had 320 co-op creameries. So if you think about it, almost every little town or county seat had a co-op creamery. And so they were competing against one another. So as they brought in milk and they processed it and turned it into butter and fluid milk and cream and whatever else, they were selling it to people in the community. If they produced too much, they started to compete against each other.
Yeah.
So the idea became, well, rather than compete and try and sell our excess against one another, what if we came together and sold our excess somewhere else? So 320 of the 622 kind of co-op creameries at that time in the state came together in 1921 and agreed to form a co-op. We were not called Land O'Lakes at that time, though. So at that time, we were just the Minnesota Co-op Creamery Association. And they didn't actually start cooling milk and putting everything together in 1921. They just formed the organization. And so for the next 2 or 3 years, they were going around making sure everybody was agreeing, signed up to be a member of the co-op. And then finally, probably about 1923 is when they really started to combine the resources and start to sell in mass production. And so up until that point too, all these co-op creameries were making their own kind of butter or had their own processes and things. So part of what the co-op did was say, we have to find a way to differentiate ourselves as we pool everything together to be separate from others. And so one of the things that they did was said, we're going to focus on quality. So they actually started something that nobody else was doing at the time of grading their milk and grading their cream that they were making the butter out of.
Are you saying that Land O'Lakes is the reason that we grade butter and milk and cheese today?
I won't give them sole credit. I will just say that they were one of the early ones of coming forth and saying if they didn't make a certain grade, it didn't get passed.
That is awesome. I had no idea.
I didn't know that either.
So they wanted to make sure that they had a quality product. How do you do that? You make sure that you grade it, that it's above a certain quality. And so that was one of the things that they did. And then quality, but also the standardizing of process. So at that time, butter could be made one or two ways, sour cream or sweet cream. And Land O'Lakes agreed and said, you know what, we're going to make our butter with sweet cream. And so they started marketing high quality sweet cream butter. And that was their differentiator that really helped them to really take off and start to find sales.
This is actually what I was very flabbergasted about. So just because I scoured the website a little bit and I see where it all began was the butter, right? The butter is the
Mhm.
thing. And it said, back when Land O'Lakes was founded, most butter was made from sour cream and sold in tubs. And I really am concerned about this.
Why? What
Like, how do
concerns
you
you?
make butter out of sour cream? Like, I'm very confused. I'm just really confused about it because in my head, I'm thinking of sour cream, like sour cream you put on a potato, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, do you actually know that process? Was it the same as it is now?
Yeah, so as some graduates of the U, you'll appreciate there was I believe he's a doctor at the U that was coming around and saying, here's a standardized process that you can use. So he
Mhm.
was looking at the entire system of all the co-op creameries and everybody doing their own thing. And he's, if you guys are going to come together. So in 1921, as they were trying to form, the governor came to visit, the Secretary of Ag, U of M president. I mean, a lot of people came to the meeting and said, we support having a state association co-op kind of coming together to standardize things because we think you're missing out. This doctor from the U was coming around saying, here's a good process, sweet cream butter. And so it was something of the taste of it and the smell of it and how it came across. So
Huh.
at that time, butter was not branded butter either. So I don't want to say Land O'Lakes really created the branded butter kind of process, but butter was basically just sold in a tub. You came in and, yep, here, we'll cut you out a pound of butter from this big tub of it. And so one of the things that we also did was say, no, we're going to package it in 1 pound packages for you and put our label, our brand on it. Because
Uh-huh.
there was very few places, there were a few that were like, hey, we're going to collect all this butter and then we're going to put our brand on it as we sell it. So think about a grocery retailer basically bringing them all in and saying,
Happens
here's
to
our
be
brand on it.
happens to be in lots of things. Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
So the sweet cream really was more about how it came across, the
Yeah.
presentation of it, the smell of it, the taste of it.
And
And
honestly, the name of it, because I would buy sweet cream over sour cream any day,
Right.
right?
sounds so much better.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was really a couple of the things that set them apart. Then, as I said, it was a couple of years before it really started to get moving and selling as the Minnesota Co-op Creamery Association, selling butter that way. And part of it was at the time, newly appointed president. So one of our 15 original board of directors was actually 2 years into the process announced to be the president. And he had spent the first couple of years really making sure everybody's on board and signing up to be a part of the co-op. So recruiting members to come in and be part of the co-op. And so they made him president. And then they said, okay, now you got to figure out how do we sell this. So he actually went out to the East Coast. That's where most of the population was in 1921 still. And so he went out to Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New York, all along the Eastern coast and tried to sell the butter for Land O'Lakes. At that time, Minnesota Co-op Creamery. And was running into a few issues and finally started to get some traction and boom, took off. And so it started to get some big sales. What they realized, and this is where the branded butter part kind of comes in, is that the Minnesota Co-op Creamery Association butter got to be a mouthful, a little hard to package and put it out there. So they actually started a contest here in Minnesota called, hey, name your favorite butter. And so name the sweet cream butter. And so they had a contest of $500 in gold was offered out. And so they received tons and tons of name suggestions and applications, whatever. And they settled on Land O'Lakes. So they had 2 people who submitted the name Land O'Lakes, a couple other names that didn't stick or whatever, like Maid of the West and Tommy Tucker. People have to go look those up. I did as well. I was like, I'm not familiar with those names, but the Land O'Lakes fit. You know, you think about where the butter was being made in Minnesota, land of 10,000 lakes, and they kind of fit nature and the wholesomeness of it and the goodness. And so, 1924, we changed the name of the butter to Land O'Lakes, and then changed the name of the co-op to Land O'Lakes Creameries in 1926. Really kind of cool.
Yeah, that's a really cool story.
It is.
I knew about.
Is it still just dairy farmers that are co-op members, or who makes up these co-op members today?
Yeah, great question. So we changed over time. So being a co-op, our members came back and said, hey, it started just as dairy members in 1921, but then by, probably 1925, 26, they were saying, we need help. You know, if we're trying to feed our cows, we're trying to produce the milk. And to do that, we need crops. And so can you help us source some different grain seeds that we can kind of help feed our own animals? But then also they're like, hey, can you also help us with feed? So around 1927, we kind of became a supply cooperative as well. So we are the 2 different type of co-ops, of the marketing co-op for the dairy milk, and then also a supply cooperative for the seed and feed to feed the animals. Now, over the years, it's changed and morphed. And so right now, today, Purina is one of our brands. So the
Yep.
checkerboard, that's a unique story in itself, and that there's 3 different companies that kind of own the rights to the checkerboard. We're one of them, and it's large animal feed that we take with Purina feed. And then we also have Winfield United, and that's been our seed and crop input kind of business that's morphed over the years and kind of turned into what it is today. And so member cooperatives around the country can sign up to be a member of Land O'Lakes that way to sell and market Purina feed or Winfield United products.
That was fast. I
Yeah.
mean, from 1921 to 1927 to like for that all to happen, like that's wild.
Different branches of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, we didn't own Purina at that time. They were a separate business, Rolson Purina. And Winfield United has basically kind of come together over the years of different mergers and acquisitions and combinations of things happening throughout the decades to kind of get to where we are today. We added a new business here in 2016 as well, Truterra. So that's our business focus on sustainability. How do we be more sustainable in producing not just crops, but also our dairy foods or dairy production and how we're doing things that way too. So they're really helping to make sure that we're focused on sustainability and bring that to the farm and trying to help people understand, like, what are we doing? Like, we always say that, the farmer is the ultimate sustainable person because they're really focused on making sure their operation continues year after year.
Yeah.
But helping to spread that story is a completely different role and job. So that's important. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where I think the role of the co-op has really changed over that time. So initially, yep, we had a purpose of take your milk off the farm, find a home for it, take care of it for you. Well, then it was help you with your inputs. Okay. Yep, we can do all that. Now I think another part of the role of the co-op is also to be there to support our members and help make sure that the world knows what's going on with them. And so part of what we are doing and part of what my job is how do we help tell that story of our members of Land O'Lakes? Because I was shocked when I first came. They were like, "Oh, you got to tell people who Land O'Lakes is." I'm like, "Really?" They're either one, a member of Land O'Lakes, because that's who I predominantly work with, but then also outside, I'm like, "What do you mean I have to tell people who Land O'Lakes is?" They don't know. And some of it is because they don't know the full breadth of who we are, because everything falls under the umbrella of Land O'Lakes Inc. But yeah, we had the Land O'Lakes Dairy Foods, then Purina, Winfield United. So we have some really high quality brands out there that stand on their own, but not everybody knows that they're underneath Land O'Lakes incorporated umbrella in that. And so that's part of what we try and do is how do we help tell that story and get that out there for our members?
So it's still considered one giant co-op, not 3 separate ones under each of those names.
Correct. Yeah.
Can you talk about membership a little bit more? Does that membership ever hit a ceiling? Is the membership an application that goes in and you pick who you want to work with?
Yeah. So especially on the dairy side of things, it's kind of based off of milk shed. So we no longer have all these small co-op creameries around the state. Production has kind of been consolidated. So as we look at production being consolidated, we call that a milk shed. So if you have a cheese plant like we do in Melrose, Minnesota, you look and say what milk feeds into there and how do we source that? What makes sense? So if we have a member in Minnesota or a dairy producer, we'll call them in Minnesota that says, "Hey, I want to go be a member of Land O'Lakes." We have to take a look and say, does it make sense for us to add that milk into our co-op? And are we looking for more milk? Do we need additional milk in those places? Because I think we saw a few years ago, like Wisconsin ran into an issue where one production facility stopped taking milk and they were not members of a co-op. They were just selling directly to that production facility. Well, they no longer had a home for their milk.
Right. Which is a huge problem because it's coming every day.
Exactly. That valve doesn't shut off just because the production facility says we're closed.
Yeah.
And so how do you find a home for it? And so that's part of what, as a co-op, we try and help manage, because you sign up to be a member of ours on the premise that we will always take your milk.
Yeah.
And so even during the early stages of the pandemic, when we ran into supply chain issues of getting milk from the farm actually to the stores and everything, we did our best to make sure we didn't dump any milk. We found homes, we found a way to take care of the milk and do things with it. That's what, as a co-op, we have to do. So in order to not get put in that position too often, we always look to make sure, do we have a need for that milk? Because we don't want to put our other members at jeopardy of not having a home. So we don't necessarily tap it, but we also are very cognizant of, do we have a need and a purpose, and can we take care of that milk for you before we agree and take you on it? So there are certain parts of the country where, yes, we will still take milk. We have capacity, we have demand. We're going to continue to grow our membership that way. On the ag side of things, there's no cap. If an ag co-op wants to sell our products, it's kind of an application process. We do review make sure they're in good standing. We don't necessarily want to start selling our products through an organization that is either going bankrupt, has a bad reputation in the community. Most of the time co-ops don't, but at the same time, we try and make sure that we're doing our due diligence of who are we partnering with and giving our brand over to have the license to sell and put it out there.
So is your membership coming from California, or is it coming strictly from the Midwest? Or is it all over the United States?
So on the dairy, we have three main regions. We have an East Coast that is anywhere from New York, Philadelphia, Maryland, Delaware, that whole area out there. And so we get some membership growth out there. And then we have the upper Midwest, which is Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Dakotas, and a little bit of Iowa. I think we might have one member still in Nebraska. And in California, yes, we have membership out there. And so our growth is coming at times in all three of those. But in all honesty, the sad part about dairy industry right now is we continue to see fewer producers or fewer farms. Still the same number of cows or an increased number of cows, just fewer farms that are actually doing it. And so it's kind of a change over what we're seeing is that some members are growing in size and other members are leaving the industry.
So would that mean that multiple employees from the same farm could all be co-op members, or would that just be the farm name that would be the co-op member?
So on the dairy side, it is the farm that has been in place for ever since we were formed in 1921. So I had mentioned that, Minnesota had a law that allowed us to form as a co-op in 1921. Nationwide, you could not form as a cooperative yet because there were so many different antitrust, meaning they felt like if you were pulling together and coming together that you were trying to manipulate the market.
Yeah.
And so in 1922, actually, the Capper-Volstead Act came about that allowed the formation of cooperatives nationwide to do business. So allowed ag industry to come together to pool their resources to try and improve their market outcome. Andrew Volstead was actually from Minnesota, one of the co-authors of that bill that helped make it possible because he saw the benefit of what was going on in Minnesota, how co-ops are coming together. And so when you look at it from that standpoint, as the co-ops were being formed and coming together, how they set it up was dairy farms got one vote per farm. So you can have multiple people on the farm, but you're just going to have one vote that way. On the ag side of things, it is based more off of volume of business. And so it's not one co-op or one business that sells our products for us. It's kind of volume of business what determines how many votes they get.
Yeah.
So moving into like the business structure of a co-op, give us like how are decisions made, who gets to decide things, and then how does money move all over to these people?
And maybe why it's a benefit to be a co-op versus other business models.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we'll start with maybe why is that a benefit to be a co-op? The benefit of being in a co-op is that you have shared resources. So as members come together and form a cooperative, it's not one person having to put up all of the money to form that co-op and put up all the capital in order to form it. Everybody's contributing a little bit. And so for those who contribute to it are able to see some benefits back. And so usually the benefit of being in a co-op is that if they do well, you get to see patronage or money back. You're also getting the benefit of the services that you're kind of signing up for as a member of that co-op, whether it's market the milk or access to products and goods and services. So you get the benefit of whatever you're signing up to have, you get access to that. But then also if the business does well, then you get to see some of that patronage returned back to you. You spread out a little bit of the capital expenditure, you spread out a little bit of the access to things, and then you also get to see some return on it that way. So now in terms of the structure or how things are run, each of our businesses primarily operates as an individual business. So the Land O'Lakes Inc., and I used this term earlier about the umbrella. Land O'Lakes Incorporation is the overall company name, but we are a co-op inside of that. And so what we do is that we have different businesses that kind of operate. So Farina Feeds knows more of how to do feed and how that business operates and what things are doing that way. So they take care of most of the day-to-day operations and manage things that way. And so we have business leaders that take care of how things are working and going on. And same thing with Dairy Foods and same thing with Winfield United. Now, where some of the uniqueness comes in of having a large umbrella and a large company like we have, we pool our resources around some things around like supply chain. And supply chain could be a lot of things. So think about warehouses, where we store our products and goods, how we ship some of those products and goods, whether it's railroad, over the road, whatever it might be, and international shipping too. We export quite a bit of stuff. And so shipping containers, that was a big concern for a while, not being able to export some of our products. So from a supply chain standpoint, we share knowledge across all of those groups. because it makes an impact that way of what's happening. But otherwise, most of them operate independently and they take care of and know their specific businesses a little bit more. So they're managing it from that standpoint.
Are like fairly different from one another. I mean, each one is very different. They're all very important to the whole picture, but they're all very different. So I can see why that would be easier to have them run separately, but yet be communicating what's happening.
Yeah, and there's some great assets in terms of understanding, you think about Purina Feeds, a lot of that is going back to feed dairy animals. And so understanding what's happening with dairy trends and the dairy industry really feed into some of their planning and preparation of what they're doing too, as well as does the Winfield United with crop inputs. These dairy producers, some of them are using alfalfa. Great. Can we come up with something new for them to help that way? Or what's the trend in terms of what they are planting, cover crops and some of those things? Can we be more prepared? So there's a lot of good knowledge sharing across all the businesses that help each other out. And that's part of the benefit of having multiple businesses that are very unique inside of one company like we do.
Yeah, definitely a value there.
People get paid for their milk, but I mean, it's also beyond that. There's a company that's making money beyond just the milk, right? I mean, you're selling a brand, you have all these other pieces. So if you're a member of the cooperative, like what happens with dividends and who decides what goes back and who's making these decisions and how are those people chosen?
Yeah, so great question. A co-op means you're led by the members. So our board of directors are all members. We have 20 board of directors, and of those, I want to say 15 of them are farmers, producers, if you will, both on the dairy and from the ag side of our business. And the other 5 are managers, general managers, co-ops who are members of Land O'Lakes. And so they get the hard decision of trying to decide how do we pay money. So they take a look at how the business did, each individual business, how did they do? How did the co-ops do in terms of selling the volume of business that they had? So they get to look at it as a whole and say, okay, how did we do? And can we give money back to our members?
Yep.
So we're extremely proud of the fact of how much money we've been able to give back to our members over the years and how we are focused on that. And so how that process kind of works is, like I said, at the end of the year, they take a look at the numbers and say, how did dairy foods do? A couple of years ago, everybody's home cooking. Numbers were great. Things were good. As we start to come back and go back to school and we start to see the school lunches and cafeterias and things opening up, that helped the business out again. But we also start to see a decline of home baking then. Not everybody's at home as often. And there's trade-offs like that. And so when you look at the numbers at the end of the year, then they get to decide how well do we do and can we pay our members back? And can we turn some of that money to them in the form of patronage? Most of the time, the business kind of presents the numbers to the board and they get to decide what makes sense. One of the things about being a cooperative is that you don't typically stay in business very long if you return all of your capital right away. So you retain some of that capital every single year just so that you can operate and continue to move forward. And the businesses from our side, what we do is we try and come to the board and say, in order to be better, more efficient, improve, or try something new, we need to make some capital investment. We need to either expand this plant, retool it. We need to expand marketing in certain areas. And so we go to them with requests for some of that capital. So they know how much they need to retain each year, basis kind of what the business wants to do going forward.
If you want to do anything with capital expenses, like you have to have all your requests in by this day. And if you don't, you got to wait till the next cycle.
Yep, exactly. Because it's not an endless supply of money. And so we do try and think about that back and forth of saying, okay, at the end of the year, if you're a publicly traded company, you're paying out dividends and everybody knows that. And so that money's going out. The hard part about a co-op is some years you look at it and say, okay, given the request for capital that the businesses all have for next year, given how the business has performed, we're actually not paying our members back. We're going to reinvest into the business. And so as a co-op member, you're not always guaranteed to get paid back every year, to get patronage back for selling your milk to us or doing business with us. Most of the years, yes, we do get back to our members, but there are times in which you say, well, business was down, we didn't perform as well, and we have enough capital requests that it's kind of a break even. There's not enough money to do all these things of investing in the capital, investing in the business, and giving back to our members. We have to make a decision which way are we going. And the board is the one who has to make that decision of where do those dollars go, what makes the most sense. And so some years they turn down some more capital requests and say, no, we're not going to do that this year. We're going to wait. And what we're going to do is make sure we get that money back to our members. And then there's other years where they go the opposite direction and say, sorry, members, we're not going to give to you because We didn't for a couple of years invest in the business, and we have to continue to invest in the business to move forward and develop new products, create new opportunities.
It kind of reminds you that it's not just one big happy family, even though a co-op tends to be that. Like, it is still a business structure. So you got to think about those realistic pieces too.
And that's one of the things about that we separate as a co-op. So as a co-op member, you're not managing the day-to-day parts of the business.
Mhm.
So you have signed up for us to do that certain job of marketing your milk.
Mhm.
So that's our job.
Yeah.
If they don't like how things are going or don't agree with everything that we do as we manage the business, their
Mhm.
role is to go back to their board of directors, who are their member representatives, and
Awesome.
talk to them about what's going on. And then the board can
Yeah.
come back and say, hey, members are not really happy about this or that.
Mhm. I just think about my uncles who are dairy farmers and how they would much rather be the ones milking the cows or being out in the field doing the crop work, and just grateful that someone else is taking care of the marketing side. They don't have to worry about whether they're using sour or sweet cream, like none of that. Just they're just farming.
The one thing about that is that most of them are in that position of, I love to work with the animals, I love to work the land, I don't want to necessarily get into the business side of things.
Yeah.
And then that's where, we as a company can have the responsibility back to them to say, we will take care of you. We'll hire good talent, we'll hire the right people, we'll try and make the best decisions on your behalf. And to help keep us in check, we have the board of directors who are your member representatives who will help keep us in check as well.
Mhm. Yeah. I love that. So as these changes have happened, I'm sure your job has also changed roles a little bit too, because you're not just dealing with individual farmers, you're dealing with large Purina brand specialists, you're dealing with salesmen, you're dealing with all of these like different pieces. None of them are trained the same. None of them have the same purpose. But what are the same trends that you're trying to relay to them or trying to preserve in the products you have and the people you're representing?
Yeah, it is a very difficult time in agriculture right now. You guys all know, you're in it as well. The population of who understand and is connected to agriculture continues to shrink and dwell and get smaller every year. And so as we think about it from that standpoint, one of my responsibilities is to make sure others know who we are, what we're doing, the producers, what's happening that way. And so we talk a lot about, there's certain things that the weight of the name Land O'Lakes carries, like that will open doors for us and get us conversations to help people understand what's going on, or Purina. So having well-known brand names really makes a difference. What becomes a challenge then is that some organizations look and say, yeah, you're Land O'Lakes, you're a company. They don't always remember we're a co-op.
Yeah.
And so part of our responsibility is say, how do we go back and help everybody understand we are a co-op? How do we tell that story? We as Land O'Lakes can do that, but what we found is that our member owners have that story. Why are they in agriculture, production agriculture too, which is really a smaller population? How do we make sure that that story gets out? So thinking about being a co-op, having our members tell their story makes a bigger difference. So part of my job is to help them understand, one, why we need them to tell their story, because they're like, you're Land O'Lakes, can't you go tell our story? We can, but that only goes so far. Your story carries a much different weight. How do we get you to go out there and be that advocate? And so helping them understand why we need that. And part of that is also understanding the connection between a co-op and a member and how we work together, because it isn't just a, hey, you're taking my milk and I'm done, hands off kind of thing.
Mhm.
No, you're a part of this. How do we continue to stay connected?
Mhm.
How do we continue to work together? So my role is to help make sure that members understand that why and that reason. And then to give them the skills to go out and be better advocates. You guys work with farmers too, and and talk to them in rural America. And not everybody's as comfortable as most of us getting out in front of an audience and talking and sharing their story and being vulnerable that way. How do I help them to do that? Give them the skills and the techniques to try and be more comfortable, more confident, believe in what they're saying, but then also helping them to talk about, they love to talk about their farms. It's almost parents showing pictures of their kids. They're out there showing pictures of their cows, right?
Yeah.
On the dairy side and on the ag side, they're showing pictures of, hey, here's my field and here's what we did. And they got videos of it all. And so how do we help them tell that story and give them the right platform and the opportunity? So Land O'Lakes can get them that opportunity, and then we come along and help make sure that they're prepared and ready to do that and try and get in that place. And regardless of where you're at, either as a producer or with the co-ops or as one of our employees, we're constantly talking about, how do you tell our story? And what's our story to tell to make sure others know about it in agriculture?
From a business side, are there any examples that you have that we should be looking for on the shelves when we buy Land O'Lakes products or Purina products? What should we be looking for and saying, yep, there were some hands laid on this to make sure stories were told here.
Yeah, one of the things you can notice, I think it's kind of constantly changing packaging. So for a while, our butter packaging features some of our member owners. I know there were some pictures of a family here in Minnesota with some of the kids of dairy producer and had it on the back of the package. Pennsylvania family, who I know very well, they've all participated and been active in our leader development work. They were featured on the box as well. And so changing that story of we highlight more that we're now farmer owned. That again, a lot of people just thought, oh, Land Lakes is the company. They forget that we're a co-op. So we started to highlight more that we are farmer owned. And then starting to feature some of those members just so that others can see that way. I mentioned Purina. The checkerboard is like one of the top noticeable, recognizable brands in the world. And so there's a lot of people who walk into a store and they'll see that and they'll be, oh yeah, that's Purina. It depends. So if it's Purina dog or cat food, that's a different company. So again, we take care of large animal. And so when you go to look in the store, Tractor Supply is one of our big companies that sells Purina on their shelves, and it's large animal feed that we're selling, or a milk cap replacer. Those are things that, definitely going to find of ours. But if you go into a grocery store and you find Purina dog and cat food, that's somebody else. And that not everybody understands that or knows that. And again, it's not a big deal in terms of knowing the Purina brand and all the history of that, but it does make a little bit of difference that way. But yeah, we have done a few things that are not necessarily under our name. There are companies that we came into an agreement to buy and to bring into the fold of Land O'Lakes because it made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those companies like Cozy Shack. So they're a pudding company. Yeah. And they were growing and starting to find some traction where they're at. Problem was they didn't understand nationwide distribution. Who understands nationwide distribution better than Land O'Lakes in the dairy case? And so we found a good partnership in that situation. And so Cozy Shack is one of Land O'Lakes brands, but it doesn't say Land O'Lakes on there because they had their own recognizable brand. And so we didn't want to take that away. So we continue to go forward with that one. Vermont Creamery is another one of our companies that same kind of thing. They are a goat cheese, goat milk type of creamery out in Vermont, obviously, that started on their own and grew. And they got to a point in which they're like, we've grown as much as we can. We reach our capacity. What can we do now? And so we found a good fit of saying, great, let us help you take you national and get into some of these bigger chains. And so you can find them in Walmarts, and you can find them all over the place now, where they were pretty regional before the partnership came about. So a couple of instances where it made more sense to keep the brand and yet fold into Land O'Lakes and offer our knowledge again across those different avenues and platforms to help them grow.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about your most popular products? I mean, I don't always think about Land O'Lakes in the institutional products, whether it's the jails, the colleges, the schools.
Yeah.
Could you break down your percentage of sales and what direction they go?
I'll do my best.
That's all we ask.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So on the dairy food side of things, we are one of the unique companies that we are really truly farm to fork, is what we say. That we are dealing with getting milk off of the farm, processing it, producing it, packaging it, and putting it on the grocery shelf for you to buy and take home. So farm to fork that way also means around the food service side as well. So our dairy foods business is divided into different groups inside of there. So there's the butter business, there's the cheese business, there's the food service. And so the food service are coming up with products that could be used at school lunches or college cafeterias, if you will, to even hospital cafeterias. Some businesses that have their own cafeterias in them as well, depending on the size of the business. So finding products that make their life easier as well. So we have people constantly looking at us saying, specific to food service, what can we do to make that better? So one of the items that I know we have for a long time, call it a butter sauce. If you go to melt butter and have a liquid butter, you burn it. So there's a fine point of melting butter and keeping it in a liquid state or cooking with it and doing other things. So we found a stable sauce that we could put in a bag that made it so much easier for food service to have liquid butter to put in recipes and do things with. Or cheese sauces. One of our other popular items is like macaroni and cheese, having it come pre-packaged so that it makes it easier. Instructions right there, basically all you're doing is reheating it. Mm-hmm. And so how can we make their life easier? So constantly thinking on the food service side, how we do that way. On the dairy case is what we call when we talk about the grocery store. How do we market that? How do we continue to keep shelf space? So the Land O'Lakes brand name, remember brands 100 years ago didn't necessarily have as much pull, but now they do. So Land O'Lakes brand name definitely gets us some shelf space. The question is, how do we keep that? And so trying to come up with new things, trying to be creative and innovative, constantly trying to put new things out there. So I don't necessarily know the dollar breakdown in terms of which one does better in that. What I do know is that our sweet cream, salted butter is still number one, continues to gain market share. So it continues to do really well out there, even though it's been around for 100 years. And so that tells us a lot of making sure we maintain that quality. That was
Right.
one of the first things I really wanted back in the day. There are people who, and I'll be honest, I didn't know the difference and couldn't tell the difference until I started to work and compare Land O'Lakes branded butter to non-Land O'Lakes butter. There is a difference.
Yeah.
And I don't want to make it sound like we're elitist or anything that way, but there's a difference and people notice that when they go to bake or when they go to use it. And that's why they continue to come back to Land O'Lakes branded butter. So what we try and do is say, can we leverage some of that to create new products that will have a place in the market as well? So we have a few new products out there. You know, I don't know if you found them yet or not, but Land O'Lakes butter balls is a new item that kind of came out. And this really came about from the pandemic. People were asking for pre-measured amounts of butter to make it easier than trying to slice off the stick themselves or whatever to find the right amount. So the butter balls are a half tablespoon of butter. So if your recipe calls for a tablespoon of butter, you're going to have 2 butter balls. There you go. You've got what you need.
I have not seen those yet. That is very fun.
I just think
Yeah.
about all the banquets and stuff that we go to, you know, like they have those butter balls in the middle of the table. I'm just thinking of
Yeah.
that. They're so fancy.
Yeah.
Now we have covered a lot of really cool material. Before we wrap up here, Paul, I really would love, just because I've heard you talk about this and I was like, thought it was so crazy. On the East Coast, when people go to get a sandwich at a deli, which are big deal, right? Philadelphia or New York City, blah, blah, blah. When they are ordering their toppings on their sandwich, tell us what they order, because it is very intriguing.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned early on that as we were starting to find sales and grow at that time, butter, heading to the East Coast. And so when we got into the cheese business, same kind of thing. We went to the East Coast and tried to sell our high quality cheese product. And so when people come into a deli, they don't necessarily order, oh, I want the cheddar, or I want the mozzarella or whatever. They go in and they say, I want Land O'Lakes. So they actually order their cheese by the name of Land O'Lakes versus by the cheese name. And we've since added another company that had a brand out there, Alpine Lace. And so people will go in and order by either Alpine Lace or by Land O'Lakes. And they're like, oh, I want the Land O'Lakes cheddar. So it's very specific to our cheese that way. And so along the East Coast and those delis, yeah, we see a lot of requests that way versus, oh, I'll just take the cheddar or whatever you got that
Right.
way.
Like they don't care who made it.
Yeah.
That brand recognition is so neat. And I love
Yeah.
that so much too.
Especially when it's been here for over 100 years.
So
Yeah.
Paul, our last question for you is, what do you do to keep it rural? I know you live in the metropolitan area, Minneapolis, St. Paul. What are those things you strive to get out in rural areas and do or see?
I love to get out, go visit our members and talk to them. But one of the biggest things that what I try to do to keep it rural is to help others understand the rural life. And so that's part of my job when we talk about telling their story is I try and make sure we get our members, even though it's coming into the metro area, come in and tell your story, because there are people who don't know and that are curious and are interested in knowing what your life is like because they just don't have an idea. We're getting like 4 or 5 generations removed from the farm. And so as we get that further away, kids don't have that experience. And so my job and my passion is to help make sure that others understand where their food is coming from, who are the people that are making and raising the food that is being put on their table, and trying to help make sure that that story is being told. I also try and make sure I get my kids out and take them, when we go back home or go to my wife's home area in North Dakota. This is where food comes from.
Yeah.
It doesn't come from a grocery store. This is where it comes from. These are the people who are making it, and understanding and appreciating that lifestyle that is rural America. Yeah, I kind of miss it sometimes of having that small community, but I also understand where it came from and take the challenge now, making sure that others know and understand where it's coming from and how can I help tell that story, get those people out there to tell their own story as well.
We don't tell our own story in agriculture, somebody else is going to. And that's a selling point right there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Paul, for taking the time with us. I've learned some new things today. I know cooperatives are such a huge part of agriculture, and I think that a lot of people maybe don't even know what they are. I think the story is so neat of Land O'Lakes and such a long-standing, very successful cooperative housed in Minnesota, which I also love. But thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
All right.
Paul.
Thank you.
It's not a party without you there. Follow our crazy on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to check out all episodes and extras at keepinitruralgirls.com.
Until next time, keep it rural.
It's time to pour on the fire and call in the dogs. That's all, folks.